Hello students, this is lesson 1-5, solving inequalities in one variable. Please put your name, date, and period. Our objectives today are to create and solve inequalities in one variable, interpret solutions. That means to understand what the solution means. Interpret solutions to inequalities within the context of the problem. Identify inequalities as true or false based on the number of solutions. Here's some vocabulary and a little cartoon for you. Our vocabulary for today is equivalent inequalities, inequality, properties of inequality, and solution to an inequality. And I'm not going to butcher the Spanish language with my accent, but you can read the Spanish vocabulary as well. Let's solve some inequalities. For part A, we have negative 3/8 m minus 20 plus 1/2 m is less than or equal to negative 14. I'm going to grab this m and I'm going to grab this m, and we're going to combine them. That means that we're going to add them together. In order to do that, we need to find a common denominator. So, and I'm going to also put them next to each other. So negative 3/8 m, and instead of 1/2, I'm going to multiply by 4 on the top and the bottom so that I have 4/8 m. So that's what we changed the 1/2 to. Then I'm going to minus 20, so that just came down, less than or equal to negative 14. Those two fractional pieces become 1/8 m minus 20 is less than or equal to negative 14. The next step is to add 20 to both sides. And so we get negative 14 plus 20. I owe you $14 and I give you 20, so now you have 6. Less than or equal to, and the 20s cancel, 1/8 m. Then we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So if we multiply by 8, that ends up just becoming 1. So 8 times 1/8 is 1, and so we can just leave it as m. From there, I'm just going to bring it up here. We're left with m on the left side is less than or equal to 6 times 8, which is 48. Now we need to graph that. So I'm just going to highlight this as my answer. And then when we graph it on a number line, we'll put 48 here on the number line, and then I'll just go a couple numbers above and a couple numbers below. 49.50, 47.46, so that we have a representation of this graph. So since it is the symbol less than or equal to, that is going to tell us how we're going to graph it. So we're going to include 48 and everything that is less than 48. That's what the less than or equal to means. Okay, so there are two ways to show this. In the computer assignment, it shows it as a bracket. And then we're going to have it point in the less than direction. But when I learned this, instead of a bracket, we used a closed dot. So another way that you could have it is at 48 with a closed dot, meaning that it's less than or equal to 48, so it could be equal to 48, and that's why we fill in the dot to show that it includes 48. For part B, the first thing that we're going to do is distribute. So negative 3 times 2x is negative 6x. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6, because we have negative 3 groups of 2x plus 2. That's less than 10. So hopefully this is starting to be familiar to you since we've been practicing solving equations. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add 6 to both sides. The 6 and the negative 6 cancel. 10 plus 6 is 16. Bring down the negative 6x. Bring down the less than. Now something happens that's kind of tricky. We have a negative 6 over here that we need to divide by. So we divide by negative 6. There's this special rule that when you divide by a negative and you're working with inequalities, you have to flip the inequality. So the symbol is now going to be greater than. Just something to remember. The negative 6 and the 6 cancel, leaving us with x. And 16 divided by 6. Let's see, 6 goes into 16 twice, so negative 2, with 4 remaining, so 4 over 6, which is 2/3. So basically what I did was I took the 16 over negative 6, and I found out that that the 6 goes into 16 twice, because 2 times 6 is 12. To get to 16, that's 4 more. And then I just reduced it to negative 2 2/3. Then we need to graph it. So now we need to put negative 2 2/3 on our number line. So here is negative 2 2/3. We need to think about what two numbers negative 2 is between. And so if we think about getting closer to 0, this is going to be negative 2, and this is going to be negative 3, right? Because then we could go to negative 1, and we could get to 0. And over here we'd have negative 4. Now, our answer right here says that x is greater than negative 2 2/3. So think about what that means. You might think that these more negative numbers, like negative 4, is greater, but that's not the case. And this time we're not going to use a bracket, we're going to use a parentheses. That's how the computer does it. And it's going to point this way, which is the same way that our inequality symbol points. It points in the greater direction. Another way to do this that I learned is instead of a parenthesis, we use a bracket. Or I mean, not a bracket. We use an open dot like this, an open circle. So that is for just greater than, because it doesn't say greater than or equal to negative 2 2/3. So we're not including negative 2 2/3. It's not equal to it. It's just greater than. So there's a little note right here. When multiplying or dividing by a negative, flip the inequality symbol. And that's what I showed up in part B when we divided by negative 6 up here. Let me just point that out. When we divided by negative 6, we had to flip the inequality symbol. So instead of being less than, it became greater than. And in this orange box, there's a little reminder for you that this is the greater than symbol, and when we have just a greater than, we use an open circle pointing to the greater direction, to the right. Or we can use a parentheses pointing to the right. When it's greater than or equal to, we would use a closed dot pointing to the right, or we would use a bracket pointing to the right. If it's less than, we're going to use an open dot pointing to the left or the less than direction. Or we can use a parenthesis, but the parenthesis goes the other way, and it also points to the left. So parenthesis is kind of like a C shape. And then if it's less than or equal to, it's a filled in dot pointing to the left, or a bracket pointing to the left. So the bracket ones are the or equal to. So just try to memorize that, it'll help you out. This next section deals with variables on both sides of an inequality. So it says to solve 2x minus 5 is less than 5x minus 22. The first thing I want to do is get the variables on one side. So I'm going to subtract the 5x from the 2x and the 5x. That will get this x to just go to the other side. From there, we have 2x minus 5x is negative 3x. Bring down the minus 5, bring down the less than, and bring down the minus 22. The next step is to add 5 to both sides, just like we've been practicing in our two-step equations. The negative 5 and the positive 5 cancel. Then we have negative 3x that we bring down. We bring down less than. Negative 22 plus 5. It's like I owe $22 and I give you 5. You're not happy with me because I still owe you money, but I owe you less money. So we just subtract these. One's positive, one's negative, subtract. That is going to be, let's see, 7, borrowed 1, negative 17. So now instead of $22, I owe you 17. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by negative 3. The negative 3's cancel, leaving us with x is less than, well, oh, hold on a second. It's not less than anymore because we have to flip the inequality symbol. So this has to flip because we multiplied or divide by a negative. Don't forget this part. So that is no longer going to be less than, it's going to be greater than. It flipped because we divided by a negative. So x is greater than, and I'm just going to do a little bit of fraction work. The negatives cancel, or a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So negative 17, negative 3 over negative 3. 3 goes into 17 5 times because 5 times 3 is 15. 16, 17, that's 2 more, so we do 2/3. 5 and 2/3. So we're making the improper fraction into a mixed number because it makes it easier for us to graph it. 17/3 is kind of hard to graph. So we want it to be 5 and 2/3. 5 and 2/3 is close to 6, and it's close to 5. It's in between 5 and 6. And then we have 7, 8, 4. Then are we going to use an open dot or a closed dot? I'm going to use an open dot because greater than, if you go back to our orange chart, look at what greater than looks like. It's going to be an open dot or it's going to be a parenthesis. And it's going to be pointing in the greater direction because it's greater than. Either arrow works, but on your homework assignment, it's a parentheses.